Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and happy Mario Day. As of me recording this one, just this past weekend, I was at the mini comic convention that we've been having at our local mall. And again, they asked me to be a guest. They asked me to run games for everybody and to kind of tie things into their store where the primary thing the store deals with is video games, as well as me knowing that Mario Day was coming and that's when this video would drop. I thought, well, you know what I'll do is I'll use the Dungeons and Dragons game mechanics, but let's have the players actually play characters from the Mario Brothers video games. And so we've got Heroscape. You can see the channel art here. This is actually a photograph somebody took of the table and of me there at the end of the table running the game. But the terrain is from an old game called Heroscape, where it is interlocking hexagonal tiles. I like using that stuff because it's stackable. So you can get hills and valleys and pits that Mario and Luigi have to jump over, as well as the toads. We had a bunch of toads playing. We designed the miniatures for this on a website called Hero Forge, so that they looked a little more realistic than what we usually are used to seeing with the Mario characters. And that, by the way, helped establish the tone that I was going for, which is sort of like what if we had gotten a Mario Brothers movie back in the day, and instead of like the one we got with Bob Hoskins, which I'm not trying to throw any shade at him, I actually love him in that movie, right? It's just there's other stuff in that movie that I don't, it's not how I would have done it. You know what I mean? So, in a way, this was almost my attempt at what if I had done a Mario movie, what would it have been like, you know? So at the beginning of the day, we went there, we set up the tiles. People were passing by. The place they set us up in was actually an old jewelry store. And for a little while, our mall almost became a dead mall. And so to this day, a lot of the stores are empty or kind of closed off, that kind of thing. But the old jewelry store, I think it was called Duncan's Jewelers, was very, very nice. So, like that wall behind me there is some kind of like black marble with some sort of little specks in it that kind of look like diamonds. But the thing that we sort of got a kick out of was when you're in there and it's very dimly lit, because before they had a lot of lights in the jewelry cases themselves, right? So without all the jewelry cases in there, it still has the exact same walls that it had before, which are these like black marble walls with the glittery specks in it, but it looks like space. It's actually a really cool place to run a game because the sort of illusion, and maybe you have to use your imagination a little, is that it kind of looks like outer space, and then framing it every so often then are these like columns like you'd think of from like maybe the Roman Empire. So on either side of that space behind me, you can see those kind of tan things to the sides. Those are the columns. So it, in a way, the room itself reminds me of some of the art that we used to see in like the 80s with the Dungeons and Dragons books and stuff like that. So it was very cool. It was a really nice place to run the game, and they actually got me kind of a recliner, kind of a chair this time, which was nice because I've got a lot of back problems, and I'd mentioned that at the last one. So, they set me up with a nice chair this time around. So that was really awesome. We had a good time. Everybody there, had a good time. But because it wasn't my normal guys playing the game, it was completely random players who had kind of like completely random things that they wanted out of the game, and in like random sensibilities and stuff like that. So the game actually got kind of weird and kind of out of hand, but it started really normal. And so to try to get the players thinking in the direction I wanted them to think in terms of like tone, I started off and my son was playing Mario, and a guy showed up. They had a live band that was going to perform at 4 o'clock. So around, I don't know, 10 o'clock or something, he came over to my table while we were setting up. The event officially started at 11, but he had told me he saw me at the previous event and saw that I was running games and stuff, and it looked cool, and he really wanted to play this time. So that's why he came so early. And I was like, yeah, man, pull up a table. We shook hands. I think he said his name was Jeremiah. But he pulled up a chair and he sat down at the table, and he ended up playing Luigi. And then Brad and his son Damien showed up, and like they played Toads. We had a bunch of other people that would kind of come and go. And then they also were Toads. But so when the game started, when it was just Brad and Damien as the Toads, Brad was kind of helping Damien make a character sheet. And by the way, all the character sheets, we made them using Dungeons and Dragons rules, 5th edition. We had Mario and Luigi be the monk class. And the reason for that was because Mario punches bricks and breaks them. So we wanted that kind of empty-handed attack. You know what I mean? And then the other thing is Mario doesn't wear armor. So, neither do monks in D&D. And we thought that was a good fit for them. And for their race, we made them human. For the toads, I'm trying to remember the race now. I want to say myconoid or mycoid, something like that. But they were these mushroom folk, right? So that was what we used for them. But yeah, everybody made a character, and while Brad was kind of helping his son make a character, I started running Mario and Luigi through this scenario. And my son told me that their first appearance, kind of chronologically in games, is this weird old handheld game that was they worked at a bottling plant. And so I started them there, and I said, you're just these, you're a couple of poor guys growing up in Brooklyn, New York, and you're at this bottling plant. The idea is to not drop the bottles and break them. So like, give me a dex check. And they did. They'd roll d20s and they'd tell me what their dex modifier was, and so on and so forth. And so Luigi, played by Jeremiah, was making all of his rolls. He was getting what he needed. But Mario was actually the one who was getting low rolls. By the way, like almost all day long, my son was plagued by low rolls. He's just really unlucky when it comes to dice. And like Brad would take one of his dice that he'd been having good luck with, and he'd give that to my son. And my son would like immediately roll a nat one or something and, break some bottles. It was like kind of comedic. But so, point being, they get fired from this. And I just tried to paint a picture that these guys are down on their luck. And so then we do the thing where I say, the circus is in town and there's this gorilla that gets loose. And this is, of course, an homage to Donkey Kong, right? And I said, he's at this construction site. And so in the game we ran, Mario and Luigi both show up and they're going up ladders and stuff like that. And in the game, I think they have big cartoon mallets. And in the version I ran, I said more like you find a like kind of an oversized sledgehammer leaning against a girder. I was trying to take everything and just make it a little more realistic. And I'd said there were these 50-gallon drums that as the construction workers are working, if they have something that they need to throw away, they throw it in these drums. And so then that's what the gorilla is throwing. I think Brad actually played the gorilla for me for a minute. But the point is, Mario is the one who gets up there first, and he manages to knock the gorilla off of this building. And he, plummets to his demise, of course. Just classic Donkey Kong stuff. But so they become local heroes. And so it's not like the whole world knows who the Mario Brothers are now, right? But the neighborhood where they live, I kind of borrowed a page from the old Rocky movies. I think the first Rocky is like Stallone is jogging through his neighborhood in Philadelphia and somebody throws him an apple and says, "Hey, Rocky." So I did the same thing. I had somebody toss an apple to Mario and go, "Hey, Mario." So there was some like reward money for the whole gorilla situation, and they turned that into a business where now they are plumbers. You know what I mean? Like we've got kind of the origin story out of the way, and now they're plumbers. And I'm drawing a blank right now on the name of the guy who invented Mario. I want to say it's like Miyamoto, but I name dropped him and I said there's how like in New York you've got these different areas where when immigrants came to America, like for instance, my dad is actually born in Ireland, right? In County Cork, Ireland. And so like when Irish immigrants came to America, um, they would live in a neighborhood with other Irish immigrants. So that way, if they all spoke Gaelic and they were still like learning English or whatever, like it was helping them acclimate to the new country that they were living in. You know what I mean? And so then that's why in places like New York, you got, things like Chinatown and Little Italy and stuff like that. And so we had said, very much in that same way that there was this little section of New York with a large Japanese population. And by the way, I set this when those games came out. So it takes place in the 80s, like early 80s. And so this Japanese guy owns a restaurant. He calls Mario Brothers Plumbing because these guys have this kind of reputation for like these are the guys that beat up a gorilla, right? Which is no small feat. So that's why he calls them. But when he's talking to him over the phone, there's like a lot of background noise and stuff like that. Luigi answers, and I made Luigi have to roll like an IQ check to tell what this guy was even saying. He failed his roll. So Luigi is like, "Hey, Mario, come here. Can you listen to this?" And Mario's trying to listen. He like rolls a nat one or whatever. And so they're thinking this is a plumbing issue, right? So they got a little van by now full of whatever tools plumbers use. And I gave them from the very beginning of the adventure these oversized wrenches. And I got the idea from this because I used to work for a guy named Dave Andrews, whose brother worked on the railroad and he owned these massive oversized wrenches that you would use to take the cars or excuse me, take the wheels off of like a train car. You know what I mean? And like he had the ability to like open up fire hydrants and stuff with this thing. It was just like cartoonishly huge, but it's a real world wrench. So we had tried to represent that in the miniatures, where each miniature came with like the biggest wrench that we were able to 3D print. And so they have these. They go into this restaurant. The guy is like as pale as a sheet and like freaking out, and he's gesturing for them to go down to the basement. And so when they do, now this portion of the game is based on the original Mario arcade game. And for a lot of younger listeners, I want to specify here, it's not Super Mario Brothers yet, right? It's just Mario Brothers. So the first thing that they encounter is a crab and they both freak out. And I'm telling them, this is terrifying for you that like a gorilla is scary, but at least that's from Earth and is like a normal thing. These are crab monsters from another dimension have somehow ended up in this guy's basement. And so then Mario and Luigi, of course, club the crap out of this thing with what we referred to as a great wrench. We were kind of having fun with the D&D naming conventions for weapons there. But yeah, they just beat the crap out of this thing. and more crabs show up and the other, kind of monsters from that original arcade game. And once they deal with that, and Luigi has a flashlight, which by the way was kind of a Luigi's Mansion joke, he shines it over at a wall and they can see where these things have busted through a wall. And on the other side of the wall are two warp pipes. And again, everything I described was, I said these things look like they are older than New York itself. You have, no idea where these pipes came from or where they go to. The one on the left is like sucking air into it. And I described it as kind of like when you go to the bank and they have the pneumatic like tube system that you put your ID in or whatever, and it, goes through pipes into the bank. I kind of described it like that in a way, where I said, there's clearly some suction on the pipe on the left, but the one on the right is actually blowing air out. And I told him, I said, this time of year in New York City is cold and it's like slushy and wintry and so on and so forth. But the air coming out of this pipe smells like spring. And you could swear you smell flowers and stuff like that. And I was thinking of World 1-1 from Super Mario Brothers, how it's like sunny and you know what I mean? And so that's what I was trying to get across to them is this otherworldly vibe. This pipe does not lead to some place on this earth. It will take them elsewhere. And so Luigi goes up to the one that is blowing air out, the one that smells like springtime and all that. And he's trying to go up the slide, as he put it. But the air is coming out so hard, he makes like a strength check or something and fails, but it blows his hat off. And then his hat goes in the other pipe. And so Luigi turns around and just runs and dives into the other pipe, going after his hat. Mario kind of like pinches the bridge of his nose, and Mario like shakes his head and is like, "This effing guy." And he dives into the pipe then too. And so then they come out in a representation, I'll put it that way, of World 1-1 of Super Mario Brothers, right? And so when they come out of the pipe, I did my best impression of the pipe noise, and that's going to come into play later. We're not quite to the significance of the pipe noise yet, but they come out of the pipe, and then there's another pipe here, and now the toads come out of that pipe. And I had said that the toads were in some other world, and I kind of referenced um the other Nintendo worlds, you know what I mean? And so I had said, they were off in Hyrule or something like that, doing just something mundane. And when they came back through the warp pipe, they find that while they were gone, Bowser has kidnapped Princess Toadstool, aka Peach, um, and the her castle has been ransacked, and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that was important for this scene is I told Mario and Luigi, I said, now this is your first time seeing the mushroom people. And I said, they are terrifying to you. And all I was trying to do is again set that tone, but it kind of backfired. So I described Toad's race as almost looking like alien grays that had been merged with real world mushrooms, right? So, like, if they tipped their head back and you could see kind of the underside of that kind of like almost hat shaped thing that they have going on with their head, it had the like venting like mushrooms have, but their faces, I described them as like really, really wrinkled. They were flesh colored, but they were really, really wrinkly and textured. And their eyes were like huge and glossy black, and they had like really small, creepy mouths. And I guess in my mind, I was thinking like, what if Stan Winston had done the practical effects for a Mario Brothers movie? You know what I mean? But I think the guy playing Luigi took it very differently. And then his thing was more like, oh, these guys are creepy, they're bad. And I don't like them because they're like weird looking. You know what I mean? And so like immediately Mario and Luigi react with more hostility towards the Toads than I thought they were going to. And then Brad and his son, who were the first two Toads in the game, they start doing that same thing where they're like, what are those things? And one of them is like, kind of looks like the princess in a way, looks like it's her species or whatever. But I think it was the guy playing Luigi was the first one to say something like, I wonder if we could eat those guys. Where he's, like, hey, yeah, they're made of mushroom. We should put them on a pizza or I don't know, something like that, right? So then the toads hear that and are like, are you hearing this? These things, these weird looking things are monsters that want to eat us. And so right away, an element in the game that I didn't anticipate happening at all is almost like this race thing where the two sides are not working together. They do not like each other. They're not helping each other out. And I didn't see that coming at all. So I'm like, huh. And before they can react to each other too much, um, some Goombas show up. And again, we've got you might be able to see them here. I don't know how well it shows up because the software that I use to record these is real blurry in terms of the way it presents pictures to you. But the miniatures for these Goombas, which Brad printed off of his 3D printer, were kind of terrifying. They were like really wrinkly and weird looking. And something that he did that I don't know if he did this on purpose or if it was like a happy accident or what. When he was painting them brown, he put the paint on so thick that then the paint got lots of cracks in it. You know what I mean? And then the place where we were playing, the lights in here were built into the ceiling and they are all like spotlights that point straight down. So that gave this really kind of moody lighting to the miniatures themselves that made them look that much more creepy, you know? But so a couple of these little brown mushroom guys show up and the heroes dispense of them, kill them off. And then after that first fight is over, Mario and Luigi are kind of saying, these bad guys are mushrooms, but the toads are also mushroom people. How do we know they're not on the same side? And like that aspect of the game just never goes away through for the whole day long. It is this like Mario's versus Toads kind of a vibe. And so they go on and like this part of it would go pretty much the way you would expect it to go. In fact, I watched a playthrough of Super Mario Brothers just to refresh my memory. God knows I've played that game 1,000 times over the years. But I wanted to know exactly how many Goombas show up at this point, and then you reach a pipe, and then just past the pipe is like a turtle guy or whatever, which by the way, Brad also 3D printed the turtles. They looked really awesome. They had very glossy shells and then very cracked, wrinkly, ugly, skin on their underbellies. So they were also sufficiently creepy for, the vibe I was shooting for. Um, but at any rate, it comes time to jump over a pit. And so my son playing Mario, again, he rolls the dice, he fails his roll, and so he dies. He goes into the pit. And so as soon as he does that and fails his roll, he's like, "Oh no," I do that impression again of the warp pipe sound. And so I said earlier, we're going to revisit that idea. That sound sort of becomes a thing that taunts the players every time they die. And so what happens is, first of all, Luigi keeps going. He like jumps over the pit and he's fighting a turtle or something, but he's still going, right? And so Mario has to start back at the beginning of the world. He does that and he makes his way there. And when he sees Luigi is kind of still going, his interpretation of that is Luigi doesn't care if I die. And then after Luigi has killed this turtle thing, he turns around and sees Mario back there and he goes, "Oh my God, Mario, you're alive, you know." But Mario's kind of like, I don't know about this. And the other thing that's worth mentioning here is this is not the same Mario. We said now this is a new Mario from a different dimension that came here through the pipes. So when somebody dies in the game, they really genuinely die. And this is a different guy from a different world, right? And we kind of played around with that a little bit. So like the first Mario that dies is wearing like red pants, the suspender style pants, you know, overalls. But then he's got like a brown flannel shirt on because if you go back to that Super Mario Brothers game, that's what he's wearing in the game, right? So now when the new one shows up, he's wearing like blue overalls and like a blue hat with like a red flannel shirt. You know what I mean? And then every time a Mario dies, we're using a different outfit we've seen Mario wear over the years from the various Mario games. Um, but you get the gist. They keep going. Really, it goes about like you would expect it to go. They get to the first warp zone, and the guy who was playing Luigi had to drop out of the game to go tune his guitar or something because again, he was going to be playing in a live band at this event. So we said he did not take the warp zone. He kind of continues on to the water level by himself. But the other guys go their own way. They all go to a warp zone and they are making their way through the game. So they go to world, I guess it would be 4-1, and there's the thing on the cloud that drops spiky turtles. And I mean, really, if you've played the game, you know how our day went, really. But so then at the end of the day, after the band had played, um, we had just gotten to Bowser's Castle at the end of the game. So they're in world 8-4 at this point. And so when they're going through the castle, people kept dying. And we had a red magic marker kind of balanced on a block. And then we would turn it 90 degrees each round of combat. And that represented those things at the end of the game where it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a pole made of fireballs and it's like moving in a circle. You know what I'm talking about? That was a surprisingly dangerous thing for people to have to navigate around on the map. Um, we had it like on its side though, instead of like an up and down rotation, it was a like a horizontal thing. But still, that was like a hard thing for them to get around. They had to jump over holes in the floor that had lava at the bottom. Again, Mario kept failing his rolls. The other people were failing their rolls too. I was worried. I was like, what happens if you all fail a roll on the same round? Do I have to give you a game over, basically, for kind of how we were doing things? But luckily, that never happened. And then the guy who'd been playing Luigi earlier is shows up and he's like, "Hey, you know, did you guys, you know, rescue the princess?" And we said, "No, man, you know, sit, grab a chair, sit down. We'll just have you come out of a warp pipe or something." So he did. And by the way, now this is a different Luigi than it was earlier. So he too is from some other dimension, you know. And so he's helping him out. They managed to get to Bowser, and my son, who was setting up the Heroscape tiles for me, he kind of made that bridge from the end of, you know, Mario Brothers. And so when they get to Bowser on the bridge, I was really surprised. They could have just ran by him and hit the thing so that the bridge retracts and he goes into the lava, but instead they wanted to just take him down D&D style, right? And by the way, for the stats for him, we were using a dragon turtle. But at any rate, they do. They just beat the guy until he runs out of hit points, and that's it. And so then they go to, well, Luigi is doing something where I think maybe Luigi actually landed the killing blow that killed Bowser. And I want to say the guy playing Luigi, who was very funny, by the way. If he's listening, that guy was hilarious. He had everybody in tears like multiple times through the day. But I think he was just kind of like saying funny stuff about the fact that he had killed Bowser, and he was talking to the mushroom guys. So Mario kind of sees that people are doing other things other than going to where the princess is. So Mario just says, I'm going to go rescue the princess or whatever. And he heads over there. And so I say, she's thanking him and, blah, blah, blah. And we're seemingly getting a very traditional ending. But then Brad, who was playing one of the toads, he is like, you know what? No, like we have free will. We're not railroaded here or whatever. There's no such thing as destiny. I want the princess. And so he goes over and by the way, we did a thing where we said when Mario and Luigi at the beginning of the game, they were like normal human height. And the way I ran it was I said when they get a mushroom, they double in size. So instead of being like 6 feet tall, Luigi is then like 12 feet tall, right? Same with the toads, that they double in size. And we had miniatures at two different scales then, based on whether, they had gotten a mushroom or gotten hit and gotten smaller. And you get the idea. Well, so at the very end of the game there, the toad that Brad was playing was still huge. He's like 12 feet tall. Or whatever a toad would be, maybe 10 feet tall or something, because I guess toads aren't quite 6 feet in their starting form. But you get the gist. He's like huge at the time. And so he goes over and he's like, hey, princess. And he's sort of like showing off for her and stuff. And so Mario goes over to Luigi and he says something about, I can't remember how he worded it now, but he's like, hey, help me deal with this toad and I'll owe you one. And Luigi kills Mario. And I can't remember now what he said either, but he's like, uh, you traitor or whatever, he's on our side, or I don't know what. And he kills him. And like that was how we ended the game because they were wrapping up the event and people had to go home and like I had to clean up my area, stuff like that. And I was kind of shocked and bewildered, and I think everybody was. But yeah, Luigi like kills Mario, and then that guy was like, "Hey, good game, guys," and he kind of ran off. And my son was so mad because he'd been playing Mario. He was so mad when that happened. And he's like, "What was that?" I was like, "I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask that guy what he was thinking, I guess." Um, Something else was kind of interesting. This is neither here nor there, but part of the podcast is not only me talking about what we do in game, but often I mention what's going on kind of out of game. The convention is hosted by this video game store called Ready Up. And the guy who owns the store, to the best of my knowledge, anyways, is a guy named Joey. And he's, I think, 29 years old. Uh, my son is 21 years old. I am going to be 50 years old very soon, March 27th, actually. And so, at any rate, Joey, after the event is over, he comes over to our table and we're like putting the hero scape into a storage tub. And he asked how the day went, stuff like that. We're kind of like making small talk. And we had taken a bunch of old Dungeons and Dragons books with us to sell at this convention because my wife had a booth where she makes dice bags and stuff like that. And so she had tried to sell some D&D stuff that I no longer use. And so at any rate, Joey sees this stack of D&D books and he goes, "Man, sell me these books. Like I really want these in my shop." And he goes, I'll tell you what, trade me something that I have in my store. And I told him, well, like 95% of your store is video game stuff. And I don't even play video games anymore. So, like, there's nothing I would want. And he's like, oh, don't give me that. There's got to be something I have that you want. And I thought about it for a minute. And he was looking through these books and he really wanted these books. And I said, you know what? There is one thing you could do for me. And he's like, what's that? And I was like, give my son a job. And he laughed. And I was like, no, no, I'm serious. I was like, my son's a hard worker, and he loves video game stuff. He's been wanting to get his foot in the door, but you guys are like never hiring. So if you give him a job, you can have the books. Um, and he was thinking about it. And he's like, come on, man. Like, I just hired somebody yesterday. And I said, I hear what you're saying. I was like, so start my son off with like bad hours or whatever. And then when somebody quits, you can, give them more hours. I was like, if my son does a bad job, fire him. I have confidence he won't, you know. I think very highly of my son. I was like, I I think this would be great. It would be a win-win for everybody involved. So we actually hired him. So so it's kind of one of those good news, bad news things. The good news is right now, as of me recording this, my son is at Ready Up and is being trained to not only, run the register and help customers and stuff like that. They're teaching him how to like repair old consoles, so that they can get them working again. They can buy broken stuff and then fix it and then sell it. So he's at the mall right now working. The downside of that means I don't know how many games my son will be in now from here on going out, because now he's going to be working, I think, on game day. So that's a bummer. We'll see how that goes. The other thing that was kind of weird was Joey was like, why don't you come out and run games at the mall? And then you'll pick up more players. But he meant like all the time, not just at these events, but maybe something like, every Friday night or whatever. We just run the game at the mall. So I ran it by my players. Everybody kind of likes the sound of that, you know. Um, so we're going to see how that goes too. He's got to talk to the people who run the mall itself, the mall manager, whatever that guy's job title is, to see how he feels about it. Um, but yeah, that was how my weekend went. That was the Mario game. Despite how it ended there, where people were, kind of mad there at the end, uh, people had a really good time through the day. And I've been amazed how many people would kind of touch base with my wife and she'd say, go over there and watch my husband run a game. And a bunch of people then started to um, get my wife's business card, which has a phone number on it, so that they can contact us because they all want to join the game. So that's kind of cool. By the way, that's why I go to the mall, is so that we can increase, the number of people playing the game. But yeah, that was how my weekend went. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend this past weekend. Hopefully everybody has a good Mario day today. If you're doing anything Mario related, I would love to hear about it. Be sure to leave us a comment. Tell us what you're up to. While you're at it, hit like, make sure you're subscribed, all that jazz. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.